All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle. My regular co-host, Brian Solomon, on assignment, as they say, this week. We'll get him back soon. Pinch hitting, actually the perfect guy, given a lot of the subject matter. We're going to be talking about our UK correspondent, Jason McVeigh. How's it going?
I kind of feel like in The Simpsons, whenever Krusty the Clown and Sideshow Bob reunited, and Krusty told Bob that jerk they replaced you with wasn't fit to hold your slide whistle. That's what I am today. I'm the Sideshow Mel's O'Brien, Sideshow Bob. Big shoes to.
You kind of got the Sideshow Bob hair going on a little. But yeah, like we said, a lot to cover, and a lot coming from your part of the world. In between All In coming up, Europe's got a new world heavyweight champion. WWE's got a pay-per-view coming to Europe. So again, a lot going on in your parts. We'll talk about a lot of it. SummerSlam, obviously, fallout from one of the biggest WWE shows of the year. I think a pretty fun show overall, and certainly a very newsworthy show. And we'll also talk a little bit at the outset here about Kevin Sullivan. So stay tuned. Real quick, let me tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I barely cracked this thing, but another fun issue. That is Mercedes Moné on the cover. I had teased that I had another big interview with a top female star in the sport, and that's her. And it was a lot of fun talking to Mercedes. We're hoping to maybe be able to bring the audio here in a coming episode, but a real deep interview with her talking about all things leading up to her return to wrestling, some self-doubt that she had after her injury, looking back a little bit at her time in WWE, and also what's ahead. And even she touches on, and this was well before even Forbidden Door, and she kind of hinted at some of what we're dealing with right now with All In and the big matches she's got coming up with Britt Baker. So a real great interview. You don't want to miss it. It's the feature story here in this magazine, but also we've got articles on GCW, on the new Bloodline, on Rio, and so much more. And of course, the place to go is PWI-online.com to pick up this and all issues. And what's coming up next, Jason?
Would it be the PWI 500? Little issue.
Are you in PWI 500 hell? I just had like that sort of, I told Kevin that sort of moment over the weekend because it'd been a little bit slow for me with like the PWI stuff lately. And I'm like, am I supposed to be doing something? And I was like, oh, the 500. So yes, I have gotten in earnest working on the top 10.
CMI sent my last batch, I think, which may not turn out to be my last batch, but for now through today. So
oh my God, you're done, and I am like just getting started. This makes me even more anxious, but I will catch up for sure. I've talked to Brian a little bit about this. What's your kind of your spoiler free take on this year's list?
Do you know, I think the list played out, I think, pretty much how I thought, certainly at least the top 10, top 20. I think whenever we all got together at the beginning, you had sent through, this is what I'm thinking of for the top 10. And I think I said to Kevin, I pretty much agree with Al, maybe 9 out of those 10 and in the exact same spots. So I think the big thing was the consensus this year that, without giving too much away, that we all agreed, who should be certainly top 10.
Yeah, there's been a little change since then, some recent news and developments in different parts of the world and different companies, I think maybe affected the top 10 a little. Maybe some people got pushed out, other people brought in. But by and large, yeah, I think this was kind of like a consensus year with, you always have some folks who've got a different opinion. But yeah, I don't expect a lot of people to be sort of like pulling their hair out or anything this year. A fun list. And very much we are hard at work at it right now. And if you want to be sure that you don't miss it, head on over to PWI-online.com and subscribe either to the print edition. And certainly there is something special about holding a magazine in your hands. But if you want a little bit faster, you could get the digital edition. And now we even have bundles where you could get both. So you could be reading the magazine a lot quicker. on the digital edition on your phone, your tablet, what have you. And then a little after that, the magazine comes in the mail. So either way, a big discount over the cover price. So it is the way to go. PWI-online.com. That's also the place to go for your PWI merch, the weekly newsletter. Are you still involved in that?
Yes, I am still involved in
Yeah.
the weekly newsletter. So I hope everyone is reading out there. Please subscribe to it if you aren't already. There's a lot of care and attention and thought goes into that every week. So there's some fun things in there, a little bit more lighthearted than some of the things we may do in the magazine necessarily, but it's fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get that and everything else, again, PWI-online.com. So let's get into the week's news. On the subject of wrestling magazines, I want to talk a little bit about a couple names that we lost, actually. That sort of make me think of my childhood growing up reading wrestling magazines. The first being Kevin Sullivan, a real iconic figure in wrestling. It'd been great to have Brian, our historian. I'm sure could go all day on it, but I'm fairly well versed. Growing up in New York and without cable television for a lot, I was very much a WWF fan. And like so many other wrestlers outside of that WWF territory, my exposure to them was reading, the magazines. And Kevin Sullivan was one of those figures that really jumped out at you in the magazine. A little scary, and in the 80s when I was growing up, and I was like the rock fan and into like the metal bands, and this was when like the whole satanic fear mongering was going on, and a lot of bands and stuff I think kind of like intentionally flirted with it because they knew it would get attention, even if they'd go home and they were like dads and going to church on Sunday or what have you. And I think Kevin Sullivan got that too. And I think for so many people that's it. And he had history before that, going back to the 70s, teaming with Mike Graham in Florida, and certainly a real storied career afterwards behind the scenes in creative. But that run in the 80s, and I don't know if it went into maybe the early 90s, is what I really remember him for was the Devil, and the pairing of him and the late Nancy Toffolini, our Stanley Weston award winner last year, was just jumped off the page. Really captivating stuff, a little off-putting, a little scary. But you talk about like having a vision and really marketing yourself. I think Kevin Sullivan was really one of the brilliant people of the 80s for doing that.
Yeah, I think, it's easy to say maybe Kevin was ahead of his time, but I think he was perfect for his time. Certainly, late 70s, 80s. That dark character that he had, like it genuinely scared a lot of people. Like no one was really doing that. Wrestling was all about being macho and tough, and there were very few really eerie, dark characters, and he really played up on that. Now, my first kind of introduction to Kevin Sullivan, I started watching wrestling in 1990. So I was kind of aware of him, but really it was WCW in the mid-90s, the Dungeon of Doom and all that kind of stuff, which was almost cartoonishly evil, as opposed to like the dark stuff that he had done before. But I think just such a creative mind, and I think younger wrestling fans would do themselves well to go and find some of his stuff. For all intents and purposes, and for all of the talk about who killed WCW and who was at fault for the bad things, Kevin Sullivan is responsible for a lot of the good creative things that WCW did in the 90s that really brought them back on par.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think it's interesting. I have had the same thought that whenever there is that discussion of who killed WCW, nobody really blames Kevin Sullivan, even though he had the book for so long, and he was always kind of like the fallback guy. They would try Vince Russo, that didn't work out, have Kevin do it for a while. They'd go to Kevin Nash, that didn't work out, have Kevin, and they'd always go back to Kevin. And it wasn't that like the booking that Kevin Sullivan did was super dynamic, like setting the ratings world on fire or anything like that. But it was steady. It was a largely, it was comprehensible. He had the things that he was into, right? And they didn't always land. You talk about like the Dungeon of Doom. And yeah, I mean, I think that in some parts, in some ways, that's kind of, I don't want to say the worst of Kevin Sullivan, but I think part of it there might be his vision filtered through the Turner production, and it worked so much better on that shoestring budget in the 80s when it was probably, somebody holding a camcorder or something, and Nancy in the Frolics of Hollywood, lingerie that he got down the street, and black, eyeliner and all that stuff. But that worked, and it was scary. I think to like the unveiling of the Yeti, right? the ice breaking and like that stuff maybe didn't work quite as well.
No, not quite as well. But yeah, like just as you said there, no one ever mentions his name when they talk about the negative aspects of WCW. And I think, that's a big part of his legacy. And as well, just, a lot of people don't think about his wrestling, but, for a guy of his stature, because he wasn't the biggest guy at a time when, size really mattered, he made a career for himself and a really good one. And that was testament to his creativity and just being different and the value of being different.
Yeah, and again, had some programs with some of the top names in the sport. We tease about Dungeon of Doom, but that was a program with Hulk Hogan, at the top of the cards, and he sort of became like his big foil during that run where he was just setting up. And it was sort of right up Hogan's alley because it was the scary monsters. It was Kamala. It was, those kind of guys. Yes, super influential, both on camera and behind the scenes, and a guy who, stayed involved in the sport right up until recently. You talk about who killed WCW. I think that's the last a lot of us saw him being interviewed for that. So certainly a big loss. Send our condolences to the Sullivan family. The other name I wanted to mention, I just learned of this a little bit before recording, and maybe not a name super familiar to people, Dennis Brent, who was absolutely synonymous with wrestling magazines in the 80s and 90s. And just the other day, I unearthed some of my old wrestling wrap-up magazines, Sting and RoboCop. You talk about some great booking. And these were all Dennis Brent's creation, and over the years he worked on the publishing side of WCW magazine, or before then, even when it was NWA, WWF magazine. He was affiliated with PWI in the years that we were helping put together the WCW magazine, and a guy with a really long career. I never got to know him, but certainly, he was one of those names. Along with Bill Apter and Stu Sachs and so many others that, again, if you'd read wrestling magazines in the 80s and 90s, you knew. And I couldn't tell you what the guy looks like right now, but it was certainly a name that I had so much respect for. I learned of his passing today after a long bout with MS. So certainly we send our condolences to his family as well. Let's talk a little wrestling, Jason. A lot of to talk about the shows that have passed and up ahead. Also, why don't we begin with AEW's biggest show of the year, which is about a week away. All in, I was going to say 2, but it's 3, right? This is technically the third All In.
3, yeah.
Yeah. And back in Wembley Stadium, I don't think it's too much to say that this is their biggest show of the year. Just realized my mic wasn't on the whole time. All right, so hopefully the audio just improved a little bit. I'll ask you the build up to this year's All In. Last year we had the novelty, first time ever, first major wrestling show, a stadium show in Wembley Stadium in whatever it was, 30 years since SummerSlam 92. Now you don't have that novelty. But you have, I think, what a lot of people think is maybe even a better card than last year. But also comes at, sort of a weird time for AEW, where there's a lot in flux, not necessarily setting the world on fire every week with ratings and attendance, but doing a lot right also. So give me your thoughts on the show and how important it is for them really to hit a home run here.
I think I came in this podcast this time last year in the run-up to All In, and I said that it's almost like they booked a stadium and then realized later on that they needed to put matches together for the show. And they just kind of threw together whatever was there, which was fine. The spectacle was AEW in Wembley. This year is the complete opposite in that they really seem to have taken their time and they've put a lot of care and effort into building the matches. I freely admit it was just after the show last year's All In, that I kind of tapped out on AEW a little bit. It just wasn't really grabbing me and I lost interest, and it took me a while to get back. But all credit to them. The past few weeks and few months, they've really pulled me back in with some really good shows. And I'm at the point where I'm actually really excited for All In this year. I think the build with Toni Storm and Mariah May, as over the top as it is, and it's really over the top at times, the two of them are fantastic. And I think the crowd are just going to eat every bit of it up. There's so many good matches on tap for this. You've got Mercedes Moné and Britt Baker getting together for their first time in the ring. Another huge match. Ospreay and MJF, Danielson and Swerve. You know, these are good stories that are happening in AEW. And yes, I think it's really important that they have a big show and a good show. But what's happening with the ratings at AEW at the minute, I'm not sure what they can really do to change that, because I think the novelty of them as a company has worn off. They're now established as the number 2 company in the world, which is an absolutely fine place to be. And I think they've maybe realized what they need to do now is what they should have been doing all along, and that's concentrating on putting out arguably the best in-ring matches of anywhere that's going right now. And I think All In's going to be that. They're going to put out some really, really good matches.
The match quality has always been there for AEW. I think you touched on the thing that sometimes hasn't been there, including last year in All In, and that is some of the storytelling and the build. And, you know, I think they, you know, Tony Khan and the AEW supporters really patted themselves on the back last year, as well they should. They should have been proud of the success they had with All In, but it was all about, like, what a great bunch of matches we had. And you hear that so much out of you know, how great their pay-per-views are because the match quality is so great. And it's true. I mean, they're entirely enjoyable, you know, shows to watch. But I remember, you know, watching the Go Home Dynamite, I think it was last year before All In. And, you know, they're selling you on Adam Cole and MJF, which was the main event. And like the angle that they did building up to that was them doing comedy outside of like an Outback Steakhouse. And I'm like, 80,000 people, you know, and this is what you're doing. I mean, it's essentially like a comedy angle with 2 friends. To their credit, to Tony Khan's credit, I think he's heard some of that criticism. I think he's reacted, and I think we've seen better storytelling. And absolutely agree. I mean, when you talk about Toni Storm and Mariah May, that's what, a year-long build, you know, essentially. That's really great long-term storytelling, climaxing at the right time in front of the right audience in UK, where Toni Storm is from. You know, Danielson and Strickland, you know, I might have been on the fence about this match some months ago, but I think they've done such a good job of building both of them up. Strickland really coming out as something special over certainly in 2024. One of the best in the world, and Bryan Danielson being Bryan Danielson, and now sort of like teasing the retirement tour. Is this the last chance do we see him win a world title, and can he win it on the biggest stage possible? And this is where AEW's calling card of putting on great wrestling really helps, because now, I mean, what are the expectations for Bryan Danielson and Strickland, who individually have had all these great matches over the last year? Now you put them together, 2 guys who I think have a style that will really mesh well, and good storytelling over the last few months. I think they've done a fine job of building it up. I was watching kind of I guess it's not the go home angle, but the angle they did last night where Strickland's bringing up his wife and kid and all that stuff. It's good, solid wrestling storytelling. Britt Baker and Mercedes, probably from a marquee value, the biggest women's match that they could do. You know, it's nitpicking, and I don't even know if it's a criticism, but any other time, that's a pay-per-view main event. I mean, I think that they could have headlined a show with that. I mean, if they happened, we still have All Out, right, in a few weeks, and you know, maybe a rematch there isn't the worst idea as a main event. But again, nitpicky stuff. I don't think Okada's on the show. There's some big names. Also, I guess the card isn't totally fleshed out yet, so they can add stuff. In terms of the buzz, and the interest, it sounds like it's not going to be the crowd that it was last year, but it's totally respectable. Last I heard, they were in the range of that 50,000, which how many shows are drawing 50,000 fans? So super respectable. Do you have a sense of where the interest level is locally there as compared to a year ago?
Yeah, I think the buzz is certainly not the same, but it couldn't possibly be. Last year was the first, and it's never going to be as big as it was then. But as you said, you sell 50,000 seats, that's a lot. That's a big wrestling show anywhere in the world. So I think the fact that this is obviously going to be a regular thing, I guess, every year going forward. So as long as they can stop it being a case of, too much of a diminishing return, then they'll be absolutely fine. And if they can come across to the UK every year and do a big show like this and draw 40 to 50,000 people, that's huge. And they can put on great matches. And, they've got the TV tapings in Wales that they're going to do over here now as well. So that's another big step for AEW on an international scale. So there's excitement and there's buzz there about that, just about the growth and having a visible product here.
Yeah, they do have to be careful with, you can't just stubbornly keep on booking the same venue if the interest is not there, and certainly still is. Again, if you get 50,000 people in the stadium, by all means, you take it. But I think about locally here, not far from me, they've done Grand Slam at Arthur Ashe Stadium. That's the September show that they do on TV. And that first year, I remember going there, absolutely packed. It looked incredible. It was almost a WrestleMania kind of vibe there. The year after that, a little smaller. Year after that, a little smaller. And, at some point it's like, well, do you keep on running this show and having a lot of empty seats where you have to start being very picky with your camera angles and that kind of stuff. Again, I don't think they're there yet. And I think, very much the hope is to, I don't want to say turn around their fortunes, because that would suggest that they're in bad shape, but certainly boost a business. And the one thing that we still keep hearing teased for so long is this TV deal. Do they stay on? Was it Warner or Discovery? Right, Discovery, whatever they call it. And how important do you see that to their future, that they do get re-upped, that it is a healthy re-upping, a good deal for them, and that they keep that that home base of TBS TNT, because I don't doubt that AEW can exist somewhere else, but unless you moved to, I don't know, an AEW or an HBO or something like that, something with real name value. We saw what happened with TNA, when they were off of Spike and ended up at Destination America and all that. It's like, it's not the same. So it seems really critical that they keep that platform.
I would say so, yeah. And I don't know, it seems to have stretched out for so long. Like, this has been talked about seemingly for the last few years about this TV deal. It still hasn't materialized. So I really do hope that they get a good one. I think, TBS, TNT has been a great platform for them, and they have the history of wrestling on those networks. So to be able to re-up with them in a healthy deal, it would be great. I know Tony Khan has said that he still thinks about what Ring of Honor's place in all of this is, and I think he's trying to involve that in it. Yes, yeah. And talked about maybe being on HBO Max or whatever it might be. And he's talked about rebranding Ring of Honor even to AEW Ring of Honor, which I thought was very interesting. I thought may not be the worst of ideas if you're trying to get it onto a channel somewhere. So I think it's very important to get it. I think what's important for AEW, and it ties into booking the stadium shows as well in Wembley and being careful of not, watching what's happened with Grand Slam and diminishing crowds. They did the residency, I think it was in Dallas, for Collision for the past few episodes, and I thought those shows looked great. The audience, looked full. The set was spectacular. The lighting was really good. and that was a quote unquote smaller venue than a lot of the places they've been running television. I think they shouldn't be afraid to do that. And
Yeah.
likewise, if a television deal comes along that maybe isn't the monetarily the biggest in the world, if it's right for them and helps their product and their growth and their visibility, jump on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. You got to make the right business decision, even if it's a little humbling in some ways. And yeah, I think you touched on it. We've talked about it here some. You're absolutely right. I mean, that novelty of them being this new product, the new shiny thing, has kind of worn off. They're around now, whatever it is, 5 years, and they are established, which is a good thing in a lot of ways. But also. Even doing everything right, what is a challenge for them is that they've sold themselves as the alternative to WWE, which is fine when WWE is no good, right? And when you think back to that 2019, 2020, 2021 era WWE, everybody was desperately looking for an alternative because the product was so bad. Now they've turned things around, and it's a really good product. And so being, what's the alternative to a really good product? And so I do think it's about sort of, all right, what do we do well? Let's really drill down on that. And it is their wrestling. And so I understand focusing on that. As far as Ring of Honor, that used to have that calling card where they had, this is where you went to for the best wrestling. I really don't know what the place of Ring of Honor is. It almost feels a little stubborn to keep this brand alive, which I don't sense a lot of people have much interest for beyond some nostalgia. Even when I was a big Ring of Honor fan back in the day, and when I sample Ring of Honor now, it doesn't feel like another company. I mean, it feels like AEW's. I want to be a D show, I guess. Yeah,
it feels like they're NXT and not even maybe
I
quite.
don't even know if it's I don't even know if it's that, because NXT is supposed to be sort of like your future stars, right? So it's young stars on the come up, and I know there's some of that in Ring of Honor, but so much of it also just feels like guys we don't have anything for on the main show, so we'll throw them over there,
Yeah, they kind of stubbornly have this thing of, there's a bunch of people here we have under contract who we don't know what to do with, so we'll put them on Ring of Honor. But we also want to check out, these 12 indie guys, so we'll bring them in and work the show as well. And then they have someone like Athena, who I absolutely love. I think she's amazing. Yeah. And she is almost, I don't want to say languishing in Ring of Honor, because she's been the champion there forever. But if she was on AEW television every week, like, she could do so much in the women's division there, and she would only serve to bolster it and make it better. So yeah, it's a bizarre thing. And it's the conversation that I've thrown out there before, just in conversation. But I think there is merit to, there are so many world titles that Pro Wrestling Illustrated recognizes as official world titles. And I would be of the opinion that the Ring of Honor title maybe doesn't deserve its world status anymore. I think it's on a par with the NXT championship, and NXT may have a better championship and a better division, as you said, than Ring of Honor does.
Yeah, because and that's absolutely, and when we gave it world title status, I believe they were still their own companies before they were absorbed by Tony Khan. But yeah, I mean, what are they other than a subsidiary way below an AEW's priority list? So yeah, the value there always was, I thought, the library. And I don't know that they really found much to do with it. I mean, that's where I think WWE really missed the ball. And I don't know how serious they were about bidding, but WWE I think would have a lot more use for that library than AEW. Maybe one day, and maybe that's part of a new deal, and they find a way to better monetize that. Let's talk shifting gears a little bit to WWE and the other big show that we had not long ago, SummerSlam. I thought a terrific show, a lot of fun, really kind of, I think, exemplifies Triple H's WWE in that it was I don't want to say lean and mean because in some ways it's so bloated with commercials. That's the thing. It's like you think like there's only whatever 6-7 matches on the card. How are they going to fill 4 hours? And the answer is like an hour of that is just filler. That's another thing that much preferable. AEW is much more preferable is that the pace they go at, and you know, in some ways it's a good problem to have because it means that you've got sponsors who are spending money on your product. So good for WWE. But you know, in between matches at SummerSlam, I could, you know, I could go drive out to buy a gallon of milk and fill up my car and then come back and the next match hadn't started, you know.
Somewhere between WWE's 5 matches on a 4-hour pay-per-view and AEW's 15 matches on a 4-hour pay-per-view. There's a middle ground there somewhere maybe that we could reach.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that criticism aside, I thought a really fun card. They are very much you know, I don't want to call it like sports entertainment, but I do think when you think about SummerSlam and what made that show fun, by and large, you're not talking about the quality of wrestling, even though it was fine, and in a lot of places it was very good, in fact. But it was newsworthy. It was angles. It was promos. It was title changes. It was betrayals. You know, it was ring entrances. It was celebrities. You know, and that very much has been the foundation of WWE for a long time. So I don't think there's a problem in leaning into that, especially when the wrestling is solid. You know, I don't know that there was anything on that card that is going to be a match of the year candidate, but I also wasn't bored anywhere throughout the card. So talking about it, well, the biggest headline, not a surprise, Roman Reigns returning at the end of the night. Now back, I think pretty clearly a babyface as we expected, and has his eyes set on the bloodline. Sort of big picture, where do you go from here? And one of the concerns I've sort of heard people voice is, does he maybe Bigfoot Cody Rhodes now, right? Because now Cody Rhodes, biggest star in wrestling, biggest star in the SmackDown brand, biggest star in WWE. When he was and Roman were arch rivals, it was fine because they were both sharing that marquee together. Now, ostensibly, they're both good guys, but you could argue that there's a lot more interest now in Roman than in Cody.
Yeah, look, I think it's a real danger because you never know. Audiences can be a fickle creature, and they can turn at a moment. And I know it's something that you and Brian have talked about on here before, that Brian always has this fear that at any moment the audience is going to stop cheering for Cody and kind of get sick of his good guy act, which is not an act, I don't think. But the only saving grace for Cody is Roman's part-time schedule, which I think will really help. Roman's not going to be there each and every week. Cody will be. So I think there's enough breathing room for Cody to develop and be okay without that. In terms of where it goes, I think we're looking at, you know, Bloodline versus Bloodline in War Games. That Survivor Series, I imagine, is the route they're going down. I'm a little concerned about Jacob Fatu's injury that he may have picked up at the end of that. So I don't know how severe that is, but I think there's a lot of potential there for he. And I think in a lot of ways, the Jacob Fatu and Roman Reigns collision, whenever that happens, is actually going to be better than the Solo and Roman one.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think he's got sort of more heat on him now than Solo does, and even up into and through SummerSlam, as fine a job as Solo has been doing, I do think it was a little bit of a hard sell with an audience that this is like your top guy, right? And maybe it is just, you know, it's counterintuitive because Jacob's been in WWE at least less time than him. But I do think maybe it's the aura that Jacob brings with him, and the fans that know his history know the credibility that he brings with him. All that said, it's like I am starting to get a little bit nervous about Cody because he really needs something to sink his teeth into. You know, we've talked about that post WrestleMania hangover, and for a few months, and I think it was fine because you're trying to establish the guy, and so like you throw him in there with Nakamura and with AJ Styles, and he just sort of like knocks them all down. Logan Paul, then you need to kind of like SummerSlam's a big one. You got to ramp it back up. They go back to the bloodline, well, which it was good, it was fine. You know, inevitably it felt a little bit derivative because we just came off of this, you know, for forever long a storyline with Cody and the Bloodline. And what's worse, at the end of it, he's just sort of like the third wheel, in the ring with Solo and Roman. And now what? I don't, where do you go with Cody? I mean, he needs something to do. They're doing the Kevin Owens thing, which again, I think will be weeks of great promos and probably a really good match. Doesn't feel like a top program, especially if they're both baby faces.
No, definitely not. And as you say, it is a real concern. I think they're not at the stage yet, but there is maybe, a possibility of looking back someday and saying, "Oh, Cody's title run was a bit weak. What did he do?" Or he had no real big storylines. He had no real big angles. I think, The Rock is on the horizon for Cody somewhere. So one would assume WrestleMania next year is where that happens. But again, that kind of maybe depends on what Roman is doing and what happens with the bloodline and all of that. So as a fan watching and not knowing what's coming, it's exciting to see, but also, a little nerve-wracking because Cody has been fantastic and I am so glad he's the champion. But you're right, he needs something to sink his teeth into. Otherwise, it could slip away from him without much of a bang.
You mentioned it, and it made me reach for my wrestling wrap up again by the late Dennis Brent. Remember you said you started watching in 1990. The build to Sting's first world title reign. It was such a big thing, and then he finally beats Ric Flair at Great American Bash 1990, and it felt like this real coronation. And it came right around the same time that the Warrior had won the world title in WWF. So it felt like a new decade, turning of the page in both companies. In WWF. The Warrior beating Hulk Hogan in NWA at the time, Sting beating Ric Flair, and that's like, all right, off to the races. Sting is our guy, and then they had nothing for him. For a month, the whole world title reign was the Black Scorpion, which
Cody needs a Black Scorpion. That's what you're saying, Al. Yeah,
right. But it was
get Cody.
Let's get Al Perez in a mask, and and it was sort of like squandered, and it was like, and I don't want to say that, but it does very much feel like they're filling time, till they get to that next thing. And as you touched on, on one hand, you could say, well, that next thing is The Rock, so it doesn't get any bigger than that. That is, The Rock is going to want the biggest match possible at WrestleMania. If that's Cody, he'll do Cody, but that requires Cody to be as hot as he ever was come WrestleMania time. If it's Roman, and if it's a really hot Roman Reigns, in some ways, this is what the problem was in selling Rock and Roman to fans this year, was that Cody was more beloved than both of them, right? But now you bring Roman back as a red hot babyface that everybody loves. That Rock Roman match looks a lot bigger than it did this past WrestleMania.
Absolutely, and that's a very good point. It's almost role reversal, because in the lead up to WrestleMania, this past WrestleMania, Roman's title run was kind of sputtering. He had run out of people to face, and Cody was the hot thing, as you say, and that's what changed plans there. You could get the exact same thing happening again, where Cody's title run just starts to sputter out, and Roman comes back and puts a whipping on the new bloodline and is the hot baby face, and fans are clamoring for him to win the Rumble. And, absolutely, Cody could be in real danger of taking a back seat. I hope I'm wrong on that. And I hope, something exciting does happen. We'll see.
The other thing that is, again, in some ways, these are all really good problems to have. But for so long, it felt like SmackDown was the A brand, in part because Cody was there and the bloodline Roman Reigns was there. I feel like Raw has really heated up as of late, in part because they've done a really good job in creating these new stars. Damian Priest is really hot now. We've got a new world heavyweight champion in Gunther, who's doing fantastic work. You got Drew McIntyre doing some of the best work in his career. So it feels like things have shifted some, and now the attention is over on Raw. Let me ask you about a Punk and a Drew McIntyre. For my money, after WrestleMania, may be the biggest match of the year in terms of build-up and anticipation. This was I don't doubt that this could win feud of the year. The work has been so good between these guys. And I got to tell you, I didn't love the payoff. It was fine, and the work was good. But my criticism coming out of it was the concern I had going into it, which was Seth Rollins being interjected and kind of muddying things up. And I think you took such a real a grudge between Punk and Drew, and you kind of muddied it up with a third player in there who didn't need to be part of it. And maybe they've got bigger plans down the line, but I think it just sort of weakened the grudge part of that match. And so much of the attention during the match was on Seth and his silly outfit and all that stuff. And it I don't know, it didn't feel like the right stage for that to play out when you had like this real intense blood feud between Punk and Drew.
No, I think I could have happily done without Seth being involved. I understand why, and I understand it all kind of harkens back to that it was, I guess, meant to be Seth and Punk at WrestleMania and all of that kind of stuff. I think there was enough juice still left, and still is left, in Drew and Punk that you could have stretched that out for the rest of the year, probably, and the two of them going back and forward. I agree completely. For me, I think it is up there as the feud of the year for me personally. The work on the microphone between the two of them has been spectacular, like just really good. Everyone knows Punk is good, but Drew McIntyre has been so good this year. The bitter character and feeling cheated at every turn has just been superb. It's Bret Hart 1997 for me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's no surprise, I guess, that WWE have kind of maybe leaned into that, because the Punk Drew match at SummerSlam with Seth as the referee was almost an homage to Bret and Taker in 97 with Shawn as the referee. Thankfully, Seth, as silly as his outfit wasn't wearing Shawn's biker shorts from 97, which we can all be grateful for.
And you had Punk dressed like Bret, which was
exactly so the whole thing was with her. But great for me, for a nerd like me who grew up on that. I love it. But I agree. I think just Drew and Punk were doing such good work. I think they deserve to kind of see out their portion of the story, at least first of all, before you insert Seth in. But I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, it felt like they combined a bunch of chapters, and I mean, I'm as interested as anybody in seeing Punk and Seth play out, and I thought it was a completely viable WrestleMania Night 1 main event, but it didn't happen, and now I feel like you got to put that on pause because you got the hot hand with Drew and Punk, and it just feels like they kind of tried to do it all at once, and it muddied it up. And then not that it's bad, because it's still super entertaining and compelling stuff. I hope we get Drew and Punk at Hell in a Cell, which if ever there was like a Hell in a Cell match, that feels like it should be it. I don't know if it ends up a 3-way, which could be fine also, but it's so, I could probably count on one hand a 3-way feuds that have legitimately worked, right. that were better than any of the two. And there have been some over the years. For the moment, at least, this isn't one of them, and maybe they get there. What did you think of what's his name? Bronson Reed. That's what they call him, right? Yeah. They call him Bronson Pinchot, who's Balky from Perfect Strangers. And him coming out, destroying Seth the next night on Raw, and now apparently getting this huge monster push. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think it's great too. Yeah, but Bronson Reed's a great talent, and he's kind of just been waiting for a moment like this, and I'm excited to see what he can do with it. So maybe this is the way that they get Seth out of that feud with Punk and Drew, temporarily at least, and can distract him with this and let the two of them wrap up their story. So I think it's great, and I think one of the great things that's been a pleasure to watch in Triple H's version of WWE is that he'll take a Bronson Reed and give him a chance, and guys like that, and put them in there with a seasoned veteran like Seth and let them shine. Someone said to me recently, "How can you sit through 3 hours of Raw still?" And I was like, no, Raw is really good right now. There's a lot of good stuff happening on Raw, and it's not the same as it was 4 years ago. So, Seth and Drew, that's a fresh feud and something I'm excited to see.
And what's really great about Yes, what's really exciting about WWE right now and all the stuff is, you talk about 3 hours of Raw being entertaining, and it is, and a lot of it is storylines and promos and backstage stuff, but it's all very wrestling, right? And when you think about like how Vince McMahon, and not to turn this into a dumping fest on Vince McMahon, but like the inclination so often when you're trying to like heat up a feud or make something really intense and personal was like somebody will hit somebody with a car. That was always like you'd go to like somebody getting hit with a car or something like that, or again, I always go back to this because it was so incredibly stupid. Seth plucks out Rey Mysterio's eyeball.
Oh, yeah.
And you see how they've gotten Bronson Reed over, and it's just by being a badass, right? Just by climbing up and bam, bam, again and again, and security comes in and then they try to stop this guy, and he's like, "Nope, I'm not stopping," and he keeps on going and going and going, and he's walking down the stage. Adam Pearce is ushering him out, and he turns back around and he gets back on the top rope. It's fantastic, and this is very wrestling. It's like. At its core, that's what this, and that's how you make a wrestling monster. So great work, and even the stuff that's gotten like personal between Punk and Drew and Seth, and they've kind of skirted that line of kayfabe, but they've never stepped away from it, right? I mean, it's none of this like tries to be too cute, too insider. It is all very much wrestling, at its best. So absolutely kudos to them. On the subject of somebody who's really kind of a wrestling purist, our new world heavyweight champion, Gunther. What do you think of the decision to put the title on him, how he's doing these first couple weeks? And the flip side of that, we are now on the other side of Damian Priest, a world title reign. How do you evaluate it, and what's his role now in the company going forward? I mean, do you see him as a top guy?
And Gunther, first of all, I always imagined Gunther's final crowning as world champion would come by defeating some beloved babyface like a Cody Rhodes or someone who the fans were behind and just they couldn't compete with this wrestling machine. Damian Priest was not the one I ever imagined Gunther would beat to be world champion. Maybe because a lot of people didn't imagine Damian Priest would be world champion to begin with. In terms of putting the belt on Gunther, I don't know. Certainly he is worthy of a title run. He didn't seem to come into that match with the hottest of momentum behind him, which would concern me a little bit, but it's going to be very hard to replicate the Intercontinental title run that he had. But he is so talented. There's no doubt he'll put together, great matches as a world champion. How the fans react to him and take to him in the long run, we'll see. His first defense coming up at Bash in Berlin, we'll talk about maybe in a minute, against Randy Orton is probably a good match for him to start with. It's probably an easy win for him to get. Randy doesn't need to win for obvious reasons, but yeah, I think the jury is very much still out for me in terms of what Gunther will look like as world champion. As for Damian, he kind of already seems to have faded into, former champion who's now involved in the whole Dominic Mysterio and Rhea Ripley thing, which from a story perspective makes absolute sense. Everybody's involved and he got screwed out of it. And, and that's a story I'm very much enjoying as over the top as it can be at some time. So, I would like to see Priest work his way back because I enjoyed his work as champion. I don't know how over he truly was as like the guy on Raw, but I enjoyed it. He worked really hard. He really tried to elevate himself to that level. And he's been a hard worker for years, and he certainly deserves that. I hope he gets back there. I really do.
Yeah, I see him as a guy, and the thing is, he's not a kid, right? I mean, I think he's north of 40 now and has been doing it for a long time. So it maybe feels a little more kind of like you're up against the clock than some other talents. So maybe a little less patience with him. But it does very much feel like a guy who is still learning, and I don't mean necessarily in the ring because I think he's really good. I mean, I think it's maybe the best match of the night at SummerSlam with Gunther and Damian Priest was a lot of it. So and that's one thing that and I agree that I think in terms of like getting him over as a heel champion, it might have been better for him to crush a real beloved baby face and Damian wasn't really that guy. The flip side of that is that he's so great with other big heavyweights in there, right? Where it is just like, two big giant lugs just bashing each other. And that was that kind of match. But Damian, it's still it doesn't feel fully comfortable in his skin, in his promos. It feels he's getting there, right? It's not that it's bad or awkward or anything like that, but it is a couple levels before somebody who sort of fully realized as whatever character it is, and granted, he's only now really sort of officially turning babyface, so we're just getting the beginning of it. Do you think fans will take to him as a babyface more than as a heel?
I think they will. I think reactions so far have been very good. And I think they were warming to him even as a heel before he kind of, I guess, officially, transitioned into being a babyface. Fans, I think, were warming up to him. I think this is the perfect feud for him. And I think stepping away from the title picture and aligning himself with Rhea, who is so popular, will help him. And they're going up against Dom and Liv, who are absolutely
so hateable. Yeah.
So it's going to serve him well. And I think, there's an inevitable match with Finn Balor that's going to happen there. And I think those will be good because, Finn is great. And Priest is leaps and bounds from where he was 2 years ago, in the ring, on the mic, as a character. And I agree, he's still not completely there yet, as you say, but he really is improving. And I think a babyface run is going to help him here. We'll get to see a whole other side of him and what he can do.
Yeah, it feels like, and I understand for storyline reasons why they did it, but it does feel like the world title run came early for him. Now the flip side of that is that it might have forced some progress that has been good for him. I think it's helped him, kind of grow into the part of headliner, and the fans are behind him. I mean, it's not like the guy comes out and they boo him. I mean, he absolutely has fan support. So I think he's getting there. He's just a little behind. But I'm happy to see it. Also happy to see Finn Balor kind of back in the mix. He's been sort of like buried in this tag, and I understand why. And he's a guy that you can do that with. You can kind of push him down in the card, bring him back up as you need be. But Finn Balor is a main event performer in every sense of the word, and I think a terrific heel too. So I'm really excited to see what this could be. What else came out of that? You mentioned Rhea Ripley not winning world title, and what do you think about the new Judgment Day? There's some who are like, all right, that's enough of Judgment Day. It's time to turn the page. But maybe a new coat of paint, more solidly now a heel faction, as you touched on, with a bunch of hateable people in it.
Yeah, I like it. I really do. I think the cool thing about the Judgment Day is they have evolved. I mean, if you remember, that started off as Edge and his people, and Priest was with him, and no one really cared about Priest at the time. And then Edge was out of there, and they became this whole other thing. I'm really excited to see this go. Even seeing them all together, they kind of have a really fun, hateable vibe to them. I mean, there's no one in the group. Everyone loved Rhea, and Priest even grew in popularity towards the end. But everyone that's there now is all very hateable, and I think they're going to be a real fun heel faction.
Yeah. I think the Liv Dominic chemistry is really good too.
Yeah, it's ridiculous and it's over the top, but it's so much fun, and it's very wrestling, as you say. So
right,
much of
exactly. Yes, yeah. I mean, that there is a way to do this that you can have your fun and still very much keep it in the vein of pro wrestling, and it absolutely is. A couple of names: Braun Breaker winning the Intercontinental title, and on the flip side, LA Knight winning the US title. What do you think about both those decisions? I gotta say, even up until now, I get LA Knight. I get the appeal. I think it's a little overblown. Braun Breaker, I'm all in for Braun Breaker. I think he's fantastic, and this is absolutely the right place for him to be at this point in his career.
I think what you have there are opposite ends of the spectrum completely. You have one guy who is in his 40s, who is almost being rewarded now for the hard work that he's put in, for his perseverance, and that's LA Knight. And yes, I think he's the right guy to put the US title on now. If you're taking it off Logan Paul, LA Knight has more than earned it at this stage. He has been popular enough. I'm kind of like you. I enjoy him and I enjoy his work. I think some of the popularity behind him has maybe waned a little bit since last year. But fair enough. He's still up there. He's still popular. He's an upper, mid-card, almost main event attraction on SmackDown, and no problems with him being United States champion. The flip side of that, Braun Breaker is the young up and coming, and he is going to be a monster. I mean, I think Paul Heyman has said as much, that Braun Breaker is the future of this business, and he is going to be a megastar. And I think I agree. The way he won the Intercontinental title, I think, was perfect. Sami got to put up a little bit of a fight, but Breaker was presented as just an absolute killer who Sami just could not stop. So I'm excited to see him, and I'd have him have a long reign with this. I think it's almost Goldberg-esque, a real heel Goldberg.
Well, the flip side of that is there an argument for the IC title maybe holding him back some, in that it defines him as a mid-card? Do you fast-track him right to that world title picture in the next year?
You certainly could do. My objection to that would be just how crowded it is, certainly on Raw as well, where he is, where you have Punk and Drew and Rollins and Gunther and Priest and maybe now Finn Balor coming through. So he would have to kind of work his way there. Not to say that he can't, but I think he's young enough that there is plenty of time. I don't think you need to rush it. A lot of the audience are still kind of, figuring out who he is. Maybe the ones that didn't watch NXT and seeing, but I don't think there's any rush on it. I think we could wait and it would still be fine. It won't do him any harm.
Yeah. The last, I think, title match we haven't talked about is Nia Jax winning the SmackDown Women's title from Bayley. And, if there's a weak spot in WWE's title picture right now, this might be it, right? I mean, I don't think Bayley ever really caught fire as champ, even though she had a terrific match winning the belt from Io at WrestleMania. And Nia Jax, and she's just kind of always this work in progress, this project. And I get it. She's, she looks different than everybody in women's wrestling. She's like this real presence. And the work has gotten better. But where do you go from here, I guess, is the question.
Tiffany Stratton is where you go from here. Yeah. Tiffany has the briefcase, the lovely pink briefcase that she now has. I'm like, back to Bayley, first of all. Bayley won the title at WrestleMania in a big moment, and I kind of challenge anyone to say what she did after that. And no fault of hers. Bayley's terrific, she really is. But it seemed like, WWE, you can only focus on so much, and unfortunately for her, she seemed to be the forgotten champion, as you say. No problems with Nia winning it. Good for her. Again, a reward for working hard and trying to improve, which I think she has. And even physically, she looks different. She has, I think, worked hard to even change her shape, things like that there. She looks different, which is always good. It's always nice to have different kind of characters and different looking people involved. I'm looking forward to the thing with her and Tiffany, because I think at some point, at the moment, Tiffany's playing it like, I'm not going to cash in on you. But I think at some point, the temptations are going to become too much, and she will. And I think it'll be a fun thing to have, a chicken Tiffany running from this monster Nia.
Is that a Nia Jax babyface turn when it happens?
I think that's what they may try to do. But my concern with that would be is that the fans will cheer Tiffany instead of Nia in that situation.
Yeah, no, I think Nia works as and we got the Nia babyface act years ago. I think it was 2018 when she was like the sympathetic challenger for the world title at WrestleMania. Right. I think she's cast well in the monster as a monster heel. But yeah, Tiffany seems to be kind of like the new exciting prospect. And it's funny because they still got Bianca in that division, and they have Jade Cargill as the other project, and it doesn't feel like any of them are, again, really setting the world on fire. Like a lot of people maybe being, I don't want to say underused, because especially in the women's division on SmackDown, which is a shorter show, there's only going to be so many slots for the women, and it's fine to put some folks on the back burner for a while and then reintroduce them in the main event scene. So we will see. Anything else you want to cover? I think we're right under the hour mark here, and I think we've covered everything I wanted to cover. And anything else coming out of either of the companies or?
I think those are kind of the major talking points at the minute. There's rumors of new people coming in all the time. I'm personally excited to see Julia still at some point in WWE whenever she can debut. And there's rumors of
a boost of energy into the women's division. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's rumors of other people like Delta, who is a big star in Australia. Rumors of her coming into WWE, and even rumors of one of our feature stars in the most recent issue of the magazine, Rio, who I had the pleasure of doing a feature on. Some rumors that she's drawing interest there. So certainly I'm excited about things like that if they come to fruition.
I wanted to mention, especially since you have on, I mean, it really does become like Europe has become a real important region for pro wrestling. When you think about just in the last year, how many important shows have happened or are happening. Clash of the Castle, All In. Now we're going to have a Bash of Berlin, Backlash, which is in France. It was one of the hottest crowds of the year. What do you make of it? I mean, is it just a different? WWE has talked about how essentially going forward, the idea is big pay-per-views outside the United States, the other ones in the United States, but even AEW and other companies now increasingly looking over there.
It's exciting. It's exciting to be a fan and to be a fan in this part of the world. I grew up watching wrestling and it seemed like, such a faraway thing. And that was in the US and everything happened there. And, the only way I could see things was through the magazines that you have sitting in front of you and through PWI. And so now to be able to have, even local shows here, like their local promotions in the UK and Europe are all doing really well.
Yeah.
But to have the likes of WWE and AEW and even TNA come over, I mean, TNA came over to the UK last October, and I went to some of the shows and stuff. And just to have them in this part of the world was great. So it's exciting to see. I think there was rumors this week that WWE are already looking at a pay-per-view in Italy, perhaps for 2025, 26. So, I mean, it's exciting times in this part of the world, and it's great to see the talent from this part of the world. Like you look at the SummerSlam card, just how many European wrestlers were on that, how many are going to be in All In. So very exciting.
Do you think England gets WrestleMania in the next 5 years?
If they do, they're going to have to fit it in that kind of 2-day window where we get good weather for, for that.
Well, are there indoor stadiums?
There are like the biggest stadiums here are the soccer stadiums, and most of those are open doors. There's one in London, Tottenham Hotspur's stadium, which I think the roof can close and it holds a lot of people. So can be done. I don't know if they get it. I hope they do, but there seems to be a lot of buzz around it, and certainly, the mayor of London was on, and he wants it there. So at the end of the day, money is what talks, and if the money is right, WrestleMania will be in London.
Indianapolis somehow has become like, the epicenter of WWE. Why? Because they ponied up. Yeah. I mean, that's it. So if the offer is right, I don't doubt it. Logistically, there's all kinds of issues with obviously running over there, and we'll see it next week and All In, which is like the AEW's biggest show of the year. And over here is going to be 1 in the afternoon or something like that. So very much outside of prime time. But it doesn't mean that you couldn't do it, It's
nice for me because I'm getting too old for these 4 a.m. finishes to pay-per-views that I watch.
Yeah.
It's nice for me on a personal level.
And it's also not so bad for me because it's like you don't, it's like in the middle of the afternoon, you could be doing some housework and watching some wrestling and it doesn't eat up your night. So I haven't really minded. And now it's like it's almost the norm, because in between the Saudi shows and a lot of the European shows, like I've kind of become used to the PLEs being on Saturday afternoons now, and it's really fine. I don't mind it. So works out for both of us. Yeah, it's like right now. It's just what time is it for you right now?
It is. What time is it with me now? It is just past 7:30 p.m.
Yeah, so it works out. It's like afternoon for me, evening for you. Yeah, so this is the sweet spot. Yeah. All right, Jason, thank you so much. Anything you want to promote before we head out of here?
No, just you can catch me on Twitter, JBladeKO, which should be crawling across the bottom of your screen now. Other than that, just subscribe to PWI, check out the PWI Weekly, the PWI website, which has the weekly ratings on there, which I'm involved with as well. So just support PWI as much as you can.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Jason. And we'll do it again soon. Enjoy All In. Fans, we will be back soon.